Everyone loves a parade. That is a parade that doesn't cost as much as $92 million. And so with a soaring price tag, President Trump pulled the plug on the military parade he'd wanted so badly for this fall. And who did he blame? The city that would host the parade, tweeting, "The local politicians who run Washington, D.C. poorly know a windfall when they see it." When asked to give us a price for holding a great celebratory military parade, they wanted a number so ridiculously high that I canceled it. Washington, D.C.'s mayor responded with her own tweet. "Yep, I'm Muriel Bowser, mayor of Washington, D.C., the local politician who finally got through to the reality star in the White House with the realities. $21.6 million of parades, events, demonstrations in Trump America. Sad." With me now is NBC News national security and military reporter Courtney Kube. Why so expensive, Courtney?
Well, the DOD component, and we should say all of these are pretty much estimates. Even the numbers that the D.C. government put forward are estimates of what they think they would need. The parade itself hasn't really been that defined, other than what they expect to be the route. But what it's going to involve, how many troops, all of that is still in the estimates range. It's going to cost a lot of money for security. It will cost a lot of money for basic things like bringing all these troops in, for fuel, for the aircraft flyovers. And then any kind of infrastructure that's needed, whether it's bringing in, facilities for people who would be watching the parade, and then any cleanup after the fact. So this is, even from the beginning, we had been hearing this would be in the millions of dollars. But then our colleague at CNBC, Amanda Messias, broke the story yesterday that the upper range was actually more than $90 million, which, of course, is, 3 or 4 times what we had been hearing out of this administration so far, Katie.
The initial price tag was $12 million. Mick Mulvaney, the budget director, said it would cost between $10 and $30 million. The president is using that money, that extra money that I guess he says he now has, on fighter jets, right?
Well, probably. There's going to be a new F-35 contract coming soon, but I don't know if it'll be that clear cut that they'll move it directly over to buying new jets.
Oh, I thought he claimed that. Let's talk about privatizing the war in Afghanistan. NBC News had some exclusive reporting today that President Trump is showing new interest in Erik Prince's plan to privatize the war in Afghanistan. Prince wants to replace troops with private military contractors, and contractors would work for a special U.S. envoy who would report directly to the president. This would completely circumvent the Pentagon. It would completely circumvent James Mattis.
That's right. And of course, this isn't the first time that we've heard this plan surface. Last summer, when there were, weeks and weeks of discussion about what the administration called their South Asia strategy, which a large part of that was how to deal with the situation, the security situation, and the political and diplomatic in Afghanistan and then in Pakistan as well. At that time, this plan, or a very similar version of it, surfaced, and there were reports that President Trump was interested in hearing about it. Officials who we spoke with said that his interest in it never really died over the last year, but it resurged again just recently. Erik Prince, the founder of Blackwater, put out a video, a 10-minute, very highly produced video, where he talked about his vision for how private security contractors could take over the bulk of the mission of what U.S. military are doing on the ground in Afghanistan. President Trump, again, has this is an idea that has been in the back of his head all this time, and we're told that it's starting to, resurface. The real question is it something that is actually plausible? We know there are a lot of senior administration officials who are against this and who would push hard, both in the Pentagon and at the State Department, of course, in the U.S. military, push against this idea. There's also this pre-existing presidential decree in Afghanistan put in place by President Karzai that really restricts what foreign security contractors can do on the ground there. That would most likely restrict this plan from actually going into effect unless there were some kind of change, unless the U.S. were really to push for this idea with the current administration, the Ghani administration in Afghanistan.
Well, let's not forget that Erik Prince has a history of private contracting work in war zones and it going wrong. Blackwater, 2007, shot at Iraqi civilians in Baghdad. 17 Iraqis were killed, 20 were injured. Blackwater employees said that they were acting in self-defense. It was a major controversy at the time. It made the nation really question whether or not we want to have private contractors, missionaries, doing the dirty work, essentially, in wars that we're fighting abroad.
And it's not just Blackwater. There are other security contractors. I mean, one of the ones that led to the presidential decree by President Karzai was another contractor, DynCorp, had a contract for training some of the Afghan police, the military and the police. And there were congressional hearings. There was a report by the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction that talked about just how it didn't work out. And they used some pretty strong language in saying that it wasn't a successful mission. So they have certainly had a checkered past. And the real question now is, is President Trump really leaning in the direction of doing this? We know that he has pushed some of his administration, senior members of an administration, to really show progress on the ground in Afghanistan. And it's a tough time for that. The Taliban are not really on their heels in a lot of areas. They've shown the ability to carry out spectacular attacks just this week. They've shown the ability to to attack Afghan military bases. So it's a difficult time if they're having to show President Trump that in fact the world is winning the war in Afghanistan.
And Eric Prince's argument is, hey, we've been in this war for 17 years. Conventional tactics are not working. Why not try something new? Courtney Kube. Courtney, thank you so much.
Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor, subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Beat the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.